Good afternoon, everyone. It's another Wednesday afternoon, and we're here, Dr. Tang and myself. Dr. Tang being the lead interviewer, and we're in the midst of Carnival season 2025, and we always have special guests and special moments. So to the listening public, we invite you to a lovely evening with some interesting information from an interesting guest. This afternoon, we have no other than one Mr. Byron Serrette. He served in Trinbao as an administrator between 2009 and 2016 as vice president of the organization. So we are getting a behind the scenes perspective of PAN administration. And he brings to us a wealth of experience, having had his roots in Starlift Steel Orchestra, having won a panorama, as we may say, in 1971, I believe. Brian, was it 1971? Yes. In 1971, and that would have been the infamous tie.
Would have been the famous tie.
The famous tie. So, welcome, Brian. Thank you so much for taking the opportunity to share your afternoon with us, both as an administrator, as a PAN player, and as a founding member of Meritone Steel Orchestra. Tell us something about yourself. What have you been doing with yourself since vacating office in 2016?
Well, I am a retired customs and excise officer, and I have a lot of my time has now been spent in an organization called ARCOT, Association of Retired Customs Officers of Trinidad and Tobago. Right now, I'm the sitting president, probably up until tomorrow, because we have a meeting tomorrow when I will step down from the presidential position and hold another position on the executive of that organization. But I've been doing some work. Our cut is about retired officers and assisting the present administration, assisting officers who have fallen on bad times, and just general service, making sure that all our whole colleagues are doing as well as possible.
Well, I hope that Trinbao is as organized as your organization, because I was in one of the steel orchestras he had a few weeks ago, and chatting with an arranger. He introduced me to a guy who won 10 panorama titles as a player, and he seemed to have developed a bad habit along the way. I was told it was a drug problem, and he has since ceased to function as a player in the band. I asked the band, so you all don't look after him, look at how he looks. He's in a disheveled state. They say we could only try so much. I would think, I said, so what's Trinbao doing about PAN players who've path in life has gone astray? And what is the band doing about that? They say, well, we can't do anything, and Trinbao is not getting involved in something like that. So having said that, tell us some. Let's start with that. Your involvement with the PAN was an involvement that would have started somewhere in the late 60s. Mathematically, in my calculation, you're a septuagenarian. So you're seasoned in this business in so many ways.
Yes, I am.
Dr. Tang is here. We're going to take you through a journey of the instrument itself and administration around it. Tell us about why hasn't the steel pan been patented and owned by particular individuals, meaning Trinbao or Trinidadians and so on? What has prevented the patenting of the steel pan?
Okay. As I've said it many times, a lot of Trinidadians feel a patent is like a trophy. You apply for a patent, you are granted it, and you hang it up on a wall. A patent is not a trophy. A patent is a commercial ability. And to apply for and be granted a patent, there are certain things that must be satisfied. First and most important, in anything that you read about patenting, you would see the word novel appears, N-O-V-E-L. Novel meaning new. So in order to apply for a patent for something, it must be something that is new. The pan was invented during the period 1939-1945. Some say a little before, whatever. But after the World War, in the end of the war in 45, pan hit the streets. It is not novel. So we cannot apply for a patent for it. Also, who can claim to be the inventor of pan? And therefore, I as the inventor can apply for a patent. No single person. In spite of the calypso that Kitchener sang, that's just a calypso talking about Spree Simon. Spree Simon didn't invent the pan. A pan was given to Spree Simon to play. So he wasn't the inventor. Neither was the person who gave him the pan to play. The invention of the pan was a process of many years by many yards that eventually evolved into the pan and the family of steel band. Because when we say pan, what do we mean? It's a family of steel band instruments. It's not just the tenor pan. It's a tenor pan, a double second, a double tenor. It's the range. Who invented all of those things? We know that it used to be, as we just call it, pan round the neck. Then it went on a stand. Then there was double pans, and then triple pans, and then bass. And so all of those things militate against patenting. So you can now apply for a patent for a process, or you can apply for a patent for a new design for pan, but you cannot apply for a patent for the pan. There's an uproar every now and then when people post certain things on social media about, in particular, two gentlemen who they say applied and was granted a patent for pan. Well, to my knowledge, one of those gentlemen applied for a patent for a process, stainless steel, for a stainless steel pan. That didn't work out. A stainless steel pan does not hold tuning. So that patent was granted and it's worth nothing. When you apply for a patent and you are granted, you are expected to make money because you have to pay for the patent every year for the 20 years. And every year that fee goes up. So they expect that you are making money by they granting you the patent and you alone could use it, or if you allow somebody else to use it for money. It's a commercial thing, as I said before. The other person who I understand applied for a patent about sinking the drum, I think it was the spin foreman, that also failed because it does not properly sink a tenor pan so that it can be properly tuned. There are certain faults in spin forming that makes it not the chosen way to sink a pan so that it can tune a pan properly. So that's patenting. Patenting, recently we were hearing about geographical indicator. Geographical indicator, I consider to be the last opportunity for the pan, for Trinidad and Tobago to own the steel band and to own pan in any particular way. And recently, I think it was in August or September, the government said that they granted the geographical indicator to pan Trinbao. I have my doubts and my questions about that whole process, and I did indicate it to many people, including an official at the Office of Intellectual Property. I gave him some information which he was surprised to hear. But the question of geographical indicator, that initiative started way back in 1995. But we had some changes of government since then, and it wasn't followed up. A fellow by the name of Ishibo Wilkinson was the director of quality, I think, in 1995, and I think he started a discussion on the acquisition of geographical indicator for the pan, and I don't think it went anywhere until a recent approach by Mitco and by Trinbao. I don't think I'll be stepping on anybody's corns if I say that. There was an approach by Mitco, which I would not go into the details of, but which I have a lot of information. And Mitco went to Trinbao, and Trinbao went to the minister, and the minister also went to the Minister of Legal Affairs and the Minister of Industry, or whatever they call themselves now. And the end result of all of that is that Trinbao was granted the geographical indicator for PAN. Whether Trinbao is the right and proper organization to hold the geographical indicator, I do not agree. But that is where things stand right now. So that is where things stand in terms of intellectual property and patenting. In 2007 or 2008, the GPAN, the Genesis PAN as they call it, was developed by a team that was put together by then Prime Minister Patrick Manning, that included Professor Copeland and others. And a patent was granted for the design and I think for the process of the GPAN. So we have that. However, all governments have done nothing in relation to monetizing or commercializing the GPAN. There has been a lot of talk, but no action. So I don't know where that goes. That is where things, as far as intellectual property and the PAN is concerned, to my knowledge, that's where things stand.
Dr. Tang, in listening to Mr. Serrette, it appears that Trinidad Tobago doesn't, on record, hold exclusively any document that speaks to us owning the PAN, in a manner of speaking. Am I correct in saying that, Brian?
I would say, yes.
Right. Which places us in the position is, does Trinbao as an organization, with the geographic indicator, have the power to consider themselves the world governing body for steel pan? From what your explanation is, if nobody owns it, then how can you declare yourself or declare upon yourself you are the world governing body for steel pan? Anybody in Japan, in New York, in London could host a competition, and Trinbao cannot say that they're touching on hallowed ground where they need to come through Trinbao. Anybody can organize an event involving the steel pan, host a festival, and Trinbao has no say, nor can they put any markers on that event. Mr. Serrette.
I'll answer it this way. Very often, when we look at history and we try to examine historical facts, we look at them with an eye as though the environment of today was the environment of that time. The development of Trinbao has gone through many stages and many different types of environments. And maybe one of these days I might try and write a book to explain it to some people, because PAN is not very important, in spite of what a lot of people say. PAN is not very important in most people's agendas. But maybe one of these days I might do the book and somebody in the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years might read it and decide to do something about it. But the fact is that the statement world governing body for PAN was a phrase that was coined, I think it was under the Adam Smith regime. And it was coined because of where Trinbao found themselves, and because there started to be interest by entities outside of Trinidad and Tobago, many of whom were peopled by Trinidadians who had gone abroad in the United States, both up north in Canada, in New York, in Florida, in some of the Washington, wherever, in London, of course. And then you had People like Tulef and they out in Sweden. So you had an interest in steel band that started to take place in various countries around the world. Kind of like a resurgence after TASCO, after that first cohort. And Pan Trinbao at the time thought that they should give themselves that label to try to have some sort of influence, not control, but influence on all of these entities that had started to spring up all over the place. And all of those entities, as a matter of fact, would come to Trinidad and would come to Pan Trinbao and seek assistance in how they organize this stuff, seek assistance from the point of view of having judges, rules for the competition. They would come to Pan Trinbao and they would seek overall organization of their various competitions. So all those competitions that they have all over the place, their genesis is in Pan Trinbago's competition. And their genesis is in what would have been taking place in the late 60s and 70s and even the 80s in Trinidad and Tobago, in Pan Trinbao. So the label World Governing Body for Pan was made out of that experience of Pan Trinbao at that time. People looking at that label now would say Pan Trinbao not governing nobody in still by no part of the world. And that is true. But the label was not about governing everybody all over the world. The label was about the propagation of the pan and the propagation of many things about the pan. So that a lot of people would have come to find out what is the latest in relation to the music, in relation to the instrument, the what we use there. You have a triple guitar, you didn't have a double guitar. So as the instruments developed, they would come to Trinidad to find out what is the latest, and they would go back to the various spaces. And tuners would go, they would come and ask for tuners would go and tune the pans until they start to develop their own tuners. So the label, as I said, is a label that was placed at a particular time in a particular environment for a purpose.
Dr. Tang.
Good afternoon, Mr. Serrette. Thank you so much for joining us. And that was a very interesting discussion that you just gave us. I'm sure our listening audience learned a lot. So I think as we've been talking about the evolution of Pan Trinbao as an administrative body, and also about the whole discussion on the patenting of the pan, I think this is kind of to be expected, given that the instrument developed through accretion, gradual changes over time with multiple persons involved. It's very similar to the development of the piano. The piano had forerunners, and no one company owns the invention of the piano. There are different models, and so it's a similar sort of thing. But so thank you for educating us on this. I know you've been involved in pan and steel band in so many facets for decades. So
yes,
let me ask you this question. Where do you see pan specifically in TT in 20 years? If you had to project a vision, what the landscape would look like here in 20 years, what would you, let's phrase it this way, what would you like to see?
Okay, what I would like to see, which may not happen, but what I would like to see. I have said it previously, and I stand by it. One of my visions for the tenor pan. Let me start here. One of my visions for the fourth and fifth tenor pan is that it becomes the instrument of choice for the learning of music throughout the world. How did I come up with that? I came up with that because in looking at the development of music, what the fourth and fifth other than a man's voice, the next thing that men did to try to make music was to use his hands to try to strike stuff. So the pan relates to that. The pan goes back to that. You strike. You use your voice and then you strike. And in striking, you don't just strike muted notes that you find with a drum, but now you are striking musical notes. So it is as basic as that. And I'm saying that if we think about it properly and market it properly throughout the world, if we do a proper study and a proper approach, the tenor pan, the fourth and fifth tenor pan, can become the instrument of choice for the learning and teaching of music at its most basic stage. That's one of the visions I have for the tenor pan, the fourth and fifth tenor pan. It is unique. Yeah, I also say it is the only instrument. I do not speak about the only musical invention of the 20th century or whatever. I find that is trite. I can't remember it because I don't repeat it. I find there are so many other things that are much more valuable to describe the pan. Firstly, it is the only representation so far where multiple notes are achieved on a single membrane. A tenor pan and all the other pans, but the tenor pan in particular, is a single membrane of steel. And multiple tones are achieved on that single membrane. A membrane which is achieved on steel, which prior to the development and invention of the pan was thought to be atonal. So that scientists thought that steel could not be tuned into musical notes. And the fellas in the backyards and all over in Trinidad and Tobago prove all the scientists of the day wrong. So that now scientists now study the pan and how do we make the pan. Trinidad and Tobago does not understand and appreciate the invention that is the pan. They discard it. It come like, my backyard have about 6 mango starch trees, so I don't care too much about mango starch. You see the people living in some other place who don't see mango starch at all, and mango starch is very valuable. So that is what the pan is in Trinidad. We have so much of it that we don't really care, we don't appreciate it. We do not take the time, and our education system does not ensure that our children know. Those children who were children years ago, who are now adults, they and all do not know and understand and appreciate the value of the invention that is the pan.
So, Mr. Serrette, sorry for interrupting you. You make a very good point because you're hitting on education, and I believe any movement as of the magnitude that you're speaking of, it starts with education, and we have to focus on the children. So let me pose the question like this. Is this music education about the pan and playing the pan and learning to read music or learning about music using the national instrument as a tool? Is that the responsibility of the government, or is that the responsibility of Pan Trinbago?
I would not say it's the responsibility of the government because we have a tendency in Trinidad and Tobago to believe that the government must do everything. I am not one of those. However...
Okay, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Yeah, however, it is not entirely the responsibility of Pan Trinbago either. Because Pan Trinbago does not command the resources to make those kinds of things happen. There has to be a coming together and a marriage and a proper understanding between the state and the steel band community as to how we put this thing together. The responsibility lies with neither, it lies with both.
And so it really stems out of, as you were saying, alluding to a few minutes ago, an appreciation for what it is. Because without the appreciation for what it is, no steps are going to be made in that direction. I understand about Trinbao Unlimited resources, but they know more about the pan and the pan industry than the officials in government. But the government should be able to recognize what is an important part of our cultural heritage. You raised some very thought-provoking comments. I don't think we've ever had a guest who has raised these kinds of issues. So you think it has to be something that where the government the state is working with a pan entity, whether that's Pan Trinbao in 20 years, it might be a different organization. Do you think pan should be, do you think music should be taught in all primary schools?
Music should be taught in all primary schools, yes. With the pan as our national musical instrument, as the instrument of choice, we have to start it here for the learning of music. And once we do it and it's successful and it goes as, then that can, just as the pan started in Trinidad and now the pan is all over the world, the learning of music on the tenor pan as the first. Why are we trying to teach our children to our first experience in learning music is on a, what is called a little flute thing?
Recorder. Well, I'll tell you why. It's you're right. And for a listening audience, the recorder is a wind instrument with a single wind pipe. The reason we start with recorder is because you're reading treble clef and it's a cheap instrument. You can get a plastic recorder. So if you have to supply instruments to a school, that's the most economical, as opposed, let's say, to buy everybody a clarinet, where they have to start learning alto clef, right? So that's why it's a recorder. But I get your point that it should be the tenor pan, but then it comes with some other logistical concerns because now you need stands and you need storage, whereas a recorder could fit in your backpack. So there's a practical reason why, and it's not only in Trinidad, all over America, students play recorder as a first instrument. But a lot start on the violin and a lot start on the piano.
And I'm sure, I'm not trying to be facetious, but I'm sure those who start with the piano or the violin don't have it in their backpack going to and from school. So
in such cases, of course, they have to have an instrument. Right. But you asked why. You asked why are we using recorder here in Trinidad, and that's the reason why.
Right. So similarly, in every school in Trinidad and Tobago, every single school, any school that the government has anything to do with, if somebody has a little private school and they don't want to do that, it's their business. But any school that falls under the purview of the Ministry of Education should have at least a tenor pan in the school for the beginnings of the learning of music, because the whole school don't have to be learning music at the same time. It's class by class by class, and to get a few pans would not be too difficult. A lot more money has been spent on much more frivolous things than having a few pans in a school.
So it brings me, I have to ask you this question because you're touching on some really profound subjects here. Now, I agree with you that music should be taught in every primary school, whether it's recorder, pan, whatever. I would be happy if music was taught. But let me ask you, what do you say to a listener out there who is saying music is a hobby? Why are we teaching our children that? They need to learn science and they need to get a head start in math. We cannot waste our time on something as frivolous as music. They're never going to make money from it. And today's world academically is so competitive. They need this advantage in math, reading skills, science. What do you say to those people out there who I am sure will make that argument? Now,
Um,
remember, I am on your side because I am a musician, but I want you to address that
yes,
question, please.
yes. Okay. Um, Firstly, this world will be a very dull place if we did not have music and musicians. That's the first thing. Secondly, some of the richest people in the world are musicians, recording artists, and people who play all sorts of instruments. They tour the world. So that do it. Of course, you have to do your math, and I have to quote my how should I call it? My fellow villager and my teacher in primary school, and my friend, the late Mr. Clive Bradley, who said, "Music is maths." That is a statement he made all the time. Music is maths. So if you're doing maths and you're doing music, there's a correlation. So do not do math and do not think. Huh?
So I want to make a few comments because you're prompting me to think a lot about this now. So I would say that the argument of, I mean, I agree with you, a life without music would be quite less multidimensional than it is now. Let's put it that way. But I think a lot of parents and the general public do not see music as essential. But I'm going to tell you about an article that I came across several years ago, and I think our listening audience might be interested in it. Now, this article, um, you can find it on the internet. In fact, I'm going to send it to Fareed after this discussion. The title of the article is Music Lessons, the best thing your parents ever did for you according to science. And I talked about it at the last Trinidad and Tobago Music Festival. And basically what this article is saying is that there have been many scientific studies where they compared children who had music lessons for a period of time on whatever instrument, they said, over different types of instruments, and they compared it to students who did not have music lessons. They may have had lessons in other art forms like dance or lessons as an athlete in sports. And I'm going to tell you what these scientific studies said. You just mentioned the correlation between math and music. Well, it is well known. Music is There is a strong correlation because rhythm is the passing of time, the duration of time into bits. And so one has to develop mathematical relationships when you learn how to play a rhythm, or when you learn how to read the notation. You have to divide this beat into 4, or you have to divide it into 3/8, so your mind works in a mathematical way. But if I could try to remember off the top of my head, some of the benefits of music lessons according to these scientific studies. It made you better at math. We already talked about that. It increased your spatial reasoning. Students who studied music had a higher IQ. It made you develop emotional maturity much faster. And that's an interesting finding because we know, of course, music is all about communication. We communicate through sound. And typically we think about communication only through words, right? But music is communicating with another person. In fact, as you know, we can communicate with a complete stranger in the audience and form this very intimate emotional bond through music. Some of the other things that science has shown is that music improved your memory. It made you a better listener, which helped a lot when you became an adult. So even if somebody is not going to be a musician, scientific studies have shown that it has a tremendous impact on the development of a young brain. Isn't that interesting?
That is
Very.
very, and that is very true. And let me just add to what you have just said. There's a lady called Aurélie Hemlinger. She's from France. I don't know when last she came to Trinidad, but she used to come to Trinidad relatively very often. And she wrote, I think it was her thesis for her master's, on exactly that. The value of music in education. Her thesis, well, of course, in relation to the pan. She wrote it in French, of course, and she told me she was going to have it translated. I haven't spoken to her for quite a while, but there is that scientific study that you quote, and I can also quote Ms. Hemlinger. Yeah.
Right. So this is this article wasn't the findings of one study. It was a number of scientific studies, but these studies have been going on for a long time. So yeah, I think if all parents read that article, they would send all their kids to take music lessons. And it doesn't mean that their child has to go into music, because we can understand why a parent would steer their child away from music. It's not an easy career, especially if you're going into performance. Now, you mentioned some of the wealthiest people in the world are musicians, but that's really the 1%, or probably less than 1% of the world population of musicians, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not that you can't make a living from being a musician. You can, if you have enough passion and drive and resilience to stick with it. But it's an interesting topic about whether you allow your child to pursue something like music if they're passionate about it, or you steer them away from it. I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but I talked about it. My father didn't want me to go into music. In fact, he really tried to deter me. He really tried. But it was such a strong passion for me. Eventually, I just did it against all odds. And I hadn't thought when I was 18, what am I going to do when I get this degree? I hadn't thought about it.
When we look
I
at
don't know how.
Dr. Tang and Mr. Serrette, when we look at music education and we look at it in relation to how the steel bands operate in their space, we've just embarked upon just this week the beginning of the season. Are you of the view, Mr. Serrette, that music education and the manner in which the instrument is taught to our children and expressed in the panyard in preparation for a panorama final by way of rote learning is a backward step in terms of the steel band's approach to preparation? Or are we operating in a space where music education in the panyard should be foremost, and that is the way to go moving forward? The question is simply, are steel bands living behind time, existing behind time, and existing in a space where rote learning may not augur well for the future evolution and development of the industry as in terms of a panorama?
Well, contrary to many opinions, rote learning has a place in the development of the brain. Rote learning has a place in the development of the brain. So rote learning is not a backward step to anything. Learning music in the Panyard or wherever, or being able to go in a Panyard and you already have an understanding and awareness and a knowledge of music, it causes the band and you and everybody else to move faster along the musical plane. But rote learning is important in all of this. There are many, Ms. Hamlinger that I quoted a while ago, she would have written extensively on what they found, some of the stuff that they found when from children who did not learn music or play the pan or go in a panel and learn a whole piece, a whole panorama piece or a whole classical piece or whatever by rote, that they could bring it back and just play it without sheets. As a matter of fact, we know that there was a time when the pan was going on there and people will be amazed to see a steel band performing all sorts of big classics with intricate parts and all, performing it almost to perfection without a sheet in front of them. That is an achievement. That is not a backward thing. So that is a notion that some people have, that from the time that you see this thing, I had to learn by rote and learn music and you wouldn't. No. You have to do both. You have to do both. The music that opens the mind and the practicing and learning stuff by rote that expands the memory. Many people will tell you that they will give evidence of how their children changed from a 7, 8, 9-year-old who was struggling, and they brought them in the Panyard in a vacation time and they started to learn, and 10, 11, 12, all of a sudden they start to blossom because something happened to open that key in that brain that caused it to begin to remember. Remember, when you're being educated, you have to remember stuff. And that is what learning pan by rote does. It forces you to remember stuff in something that you like, and therefore you can remember stuff in many other areas. The door is open. The memory door, the door of memory is open by the practicing of learning by rote. So it's not backward. Yeah?
Great. What you say that the world governing body, as I know you lend us some clarification there, that Pan Trinbago's relationship with the steel bands is a relationship where they lend support to the steel bands through music education and providing the tools in which they can operate in their space. In your experience in Pan Trinbago, how involved did you all get in terms of developing a steel band and a steel orchestra in the various communities? How did you lend assistance to the steel bands?
Pan Trinbago's role, let me start differently. Pan Trinbago is an organization of steel bands. So therefore, to be a member of Pan Trinbago, you have to have a steel band. So Pan Trinbago is not in the business of opening steel bands per se. Doesn't mean that if there's somebody in a community that wants to open a steel band and we recognize a need and an opportunity, that Pan Trinbago does not have a responsibility to assist. But at the end of the day, you have to have your band. And Pan Trinbago, I don't know what's going on now, but I would go as far back as the 70s. Remember, Pan Trinbago really was formed in August of 1971. And during the 70s, Pan Trinbago would have had courses during the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. They would have courses training courses for business, training courses for music, training courses for all manner of things. We would ask different people in the community, in the society, and people would give of their time. And I know many people who would have benefited from steel band courses or courses run by Pan Trinbao, assisting, teaching and training their people in the band how to run a band, how to run an organization, financial management, musical abilities, a range of things. So Pan Trinbao has been doing that for years. What is taking place right now, I cannot say. I do not know what their agenda is. Their agenda seems to be something different. But I know that that has gone on for, as I said, from ever since Pan Trinbao was formed. So Pan Trinbao has been part and parcel of the development of steel bands through the years. Steel bands didn't just develop because of their own volition and whatever. There were many things. Sometimes in a community there might be one person who, and Pan Trinbao will give. You have to give opportunity. The question of having a panorama or having a music steel band festival, all those are opportunities for the bands and the members of the bands to develop in different and particular ways. Okay. You're developing your music skills, abilities, and appreciation, but you're also developing your ability to organize, to go to to address these competitions, and to manage your band, and to manage your finances, to acquire finances and manage them in a particular way.
Okay.
So all these big bands that we have now and big sponsors and all that didn't happen by guess. That happened over years of a lot of things coming together to make it happen, for it to reach how it reached today. Those things, and people after us do all of this happen now. They didn't happen now. Those things have been developing for years. They've been in incubation.
Great. Mr. Serrette, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's a good taste of what is yet to come. We will have another opportunity with you later on, and hopefully you'll make yourself available to us. It's been an eventful afternoon in terms of some of the content you've shared. I want to thank you for that.
You're welcome anytime.